Adrian Cole did not expect that his first journey to the royal court of Valoria would begin with confusion, awe, and a command that would change his life forever. He had been chosen as one of the few men from Earth to visit the distant human kingdom that had grown powerful among the stars. The great palace of Queen Illyra was more beautiful than anything his eyes had ever known. Its tall towers touched the sky like pillars of light. The walls glowed with gold and white marble, and the floors were so polished that Adrian could see the reflection of his own unsure face in them. He walked through vast corridors filled with tapestries showing battles, weddings, and coronations. Every step seemed to echo through history. He felt as though he had stepped into a fairy tale, though he was not sure if he belonged in it. The hall of the throne was even greater. Long windows let in streams of sunlight that fell upon the queen's seat, built from shining crystal and steel. Guards stood still as statues, their eyes cold and sharp. Nobles in long robes gathered on both sides of the red carpet Adrian walked upon. Some held expressions of curiosity, while others looked at him with disdain, as if he had no right to walk there. Adrian's heart beat faster and his hands grew clammy. He wished he could already be back in his ship, safe and unnoticed, but he reminded himself that he had been chosen for a reason. For days he had told himself that, though even now he doubted it. Then he saw the queen. She sat on her throne, tall and elegant, her crown gleaming with jewels that reflected the sun. Her eyes were not cruel, but they were unmovable, firm like the stone of a mountain. When she looked at Adrian, he felt as if she could see through the very walls of his heart. She raised a hand, and all the whispers died away. Silence filled the hall as her voice rang out. "Adrian Cole of Earth," she said, clear and calm, with words that carried absolute power. "You will wed my daughter." The hall erupted with gasps. Nobles turned to one another in shock. Some covered their mouths while others frowned openly. Adrian froze where he stood. He thought perhaps his ears had failed him and that he had not heard correctly. But the queen did not laugh. She did not correct herself. She only waited, her eyes locked on his. He turned slightly, his gaze searching. Beside the throne sat Princess Lyanna. Her dress shimmered like starlight against the marble floor. She was young, but her posture held discipline and strength. Even as she sat, her spine remained tall, her chin lifted. Adrian's eyes met hers, and he found no warmth there. She was studying him the way one might study a soldier in training, noting flaws and hesitations. Her beauty was unquestionable, but her expression was almost unreadable, caught between judgment and curiosity. Adrian felt as if the weight of the entire palace was pressing down upon him. Every noble eye stared. Every heartbeat seemed to echo louder in his ears. Marriage? To the princess herself? Why him? He was no prince, no warrior, no noble. He was only a man from Earth, chosen as a representative but hardly prepared for such a fate. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Before he could gather himself, the queen spoke again, her tone leaving no space for argument. "It is decided. The kingdom stands at a turning point, and unity must be forged. You will stand beside my daughter. Together, you will carry the strength of two worlds." The court fell silent once more. Even those who seemed ready to object did not dare. Adrian glanced again at Lyanna, wondering if she would protest. But she remained still, her face calm, though her eyes revealed a flicker of unease. She clearly had not chosen him, but just like him, she had no choice. Adrian's thoughts swirled like a storm. He had expected diplomacy, speeches, and perhaps even celebrations. But this was something far beyond his imagining. Now, the path ahead seemed strange and terrifying, yet there was no turning back. He was bound by the queen's words, caught in the destiny she had chosen for him. And though he could not yet know it, the world beyond the throne room doors would never again be the same for him. For the princess, or for the kingdom itself. Adrian did not sleep well the night after the queen's command. He lay awake in his chamber, staring at the carved ceiling of the guest wing. His mind kept replaying the moment of the queen's words in the faces of the nobles, who looked ready to protest. He wondered if this was all a mistake. Perhaps he had simply been placed in a story where he did not belong. He tried to calm himself, but the thought would not leave him. Why was he chosen, a man with no title and no noble birth, to marry the princess of such a powerful land? The following morning, a servant came for him and told him he was to join Princess Lyanna for a walk through the palace gardens. Adrian's stomach tightened at the thought. He had barely spoken with her the day before, and she had looked at him like someone judging whether a stone was worth polishing. He put on the clean clothes left for him, simple but neat, and followed the servant down the long halls. The gardens were vast and beautiful. Clear fountains sang as water poured into shining pools. Flowers of countless colors spread across the ground. The scent of roses filled the warm air. Birds sang softly from high branches, and marble statues lined the paths. Adrian stopped at the sight of Liana waiting under a tall tree. Her gown was white trimmed with silver, and a thin crown rested on her dark hair. She stood straight, her hands folded lightly. She could have been a picture in one of the tapestries that filled the halls. When he approached, she turned her eyes on him. For a moment neither spoke. Finally she said, "You walk heavily. Your steps sound untrained." Adrian paused, not sure how to answer. "Was not raised in a palace," he said. "On earth we do not walk like princes. We walk like people who work in streets and fields." Her lips twitched slightly, though not quite into a smile. "And yet the Queen has chosen you to stand beside me." "I did not ask for it," Adrian replied. It was as surprised as anyone. She studied him more closely now. "Do you know that many here see you as unworthy? They think my mother has brought shame on our house. They whisper in the halls and say I should refuse you." Adrian met her gaze. "Do you want that?" "Yes." A silence hung in the air. She looked toward the fountain before answering. "I do not know." They walked on, side by side. Adrian noticed that, though she spoke with cold words, there was something thoughtful under her sharp tone. She was not careless in the way she judged him. She seemed to be weighing him, testing him, looking for something hidden beneath his plain appearance. During their walk, townsfolk were permitted to enter through a side gate. Several poor families, dressed in patched clothes, came forward with petitions. Mothers held children by the hands. Men spoke about hunger and lack of work, and old women pleaded for medical help. Adrian watched as Liana stopped and listened. Though she appeared proud at first, her face softened as she heard their stories. She took notes, asked questions, and promised to bring their words to the council. Adrian saw how her hand trembled slightly as she held her writing board, though she tried to keep her voice steady. She cared, even if much of the court would never know it. At that moment, he felt a spark of respect for her. When the townsfolk left, Adrian said quietly, "You care for them, even if you do not show it to others." She frowned at him. "You take too many liberties with your words," but as she turned to leave, he noticed the faintest trace of color on her cheeks. That night, back in his chamber, Adrian thought over everything. He saw how nobles despised him, how Liana doubted him, and how whispers grew louder behind every wall. He realized he was not only unwanted, but was caught in a storm that could break the kingdom apart. Yet one thought stayed with him, stronger than all the rest. The Queen had chosen him, and she had done so with reason. Perhaps he had not seen that reason yet, but it was there. And somewhere deep inside, he began to sense that his future and the princess's were tied together, not only by a command, but by something much larger that neither of them could yet understand. Adrian woke early the next morning, but not because he was rested. His sleep had been broken by dreams of unrest and voices that whispered against him. When he dressed and stepped into the courtyard, he noticed a strange silence hanging heavy in the air. Guards moved more quickly, servants whispered in corners, and messengers ran across the palace halls. Something was happening. Soon the news reached him. A revolt had broken out in one of the mining provinces far from the capital. Miners and workers were refusing to pay their taxes, claiming that the Queen's council had taken too much from them and left them starving. They had armed themselves, blocking the roads and refusing royal soldiers entry. The nobility whispered that this was the dangerous result of the Queen's command to tie her daughter to a man like him. They said his presence, a foreigner from Earth, had weakened respect for the throne. In the middle of the palace square, the Queen prepared to send representatives to calm the province. To Adrian's surprise, he was ordered to go along with Princess Liana. At first he thought she would object, but instead she simply bowed her head in obedience to her mother. There was no hiding the doubt in her eyes, though. She clearly wondered how safe it would be to travel with a man who did not belong to her world. Their journey took them days across the countryside. Adrian looked out from the carriage windows at golden fields, green forests, and villages filled with hard-working people. Liana read reports during the journey and asked questions to the soldiers guarding them. When they neared the mining province, the first signs of trouble appeared. Houses stood empty, smoke rose in the distance, and groups of armed men blocked the roads. Their faces were dark with dust, their clothes stained from work, but their eyes burned with anger. The royal convoy was forced to stop, and Adrian felt the tension thicken. The leader of the rebels shouted to them from the road, "No more empty promises. We will not starve so that nobles may eat, turn back, or be treated as enemies." Adrian looked at Liana, expecting her to answer, but before she could speak, arrows flew from the hills. The convoy was under attack. Soldiers scrambled to raise shields, horses screamed, and chaos filled the air. Adrian found himself caught in the middle of it, heart pounding like a drum in his chest. One of the guards fell nearby, his sword slipping from his hand. Without thinking, Adrian picked it up. The blade was heavier than he expected, and he had no training beyond playful practice in his youth. But instinct and fear drove him. As attackers rushed closer, Adrian swung clumsily, blocking one strike and shoving a man aside. He shouted to Liana to stay behind him as he cut a path through the confusion. Despite his lack of skill, something in Adrian kept him moving forward. He was not graceful, yet he was determined. Every blow he struck was filled with raw willpower. His arms ached, but he would not let the princess fall into enemy hands. He saw her stumble, her gown torn as she tried to keep pace, and he reached for her with his free hand. Together they pushed toward a side path, the roar of battle fading as they escaped into the shadows of the hills. When at last they stopped, both breathing hard, Adrian's clothes were torn, his arms scratched, and his face lined with sweat. Liana looked at him, her eyes wide with shock. She had not expected such bravery from a man who barely knew how to hold a blade. "You fought for me," she said softly, almost in disbelief. Adrian shook his head, still holding the sword tightly. "I fought because it was the only choice. Leaving you would have meant leaving myself." For a long moment, they stood in silence under the pale light of the twin moons. The night was cold, yet something warm passed between them. For the first time her sharpness faded, replaced with a new kind of respect. Still, the danger was far from gone. The revolt was organized and strong, more than just a protest from starving workers. Adrian could sense it in the way the attack had been planned, in the precision of their ambush. Someone was guiding them with knowledge from inside the palace walls. As the fire of burning wagons flickered in the distance, Adrian realized that what had begun as an unwanted marriage was turning into something far greater. His union with Liana was not only a bond between two people, but also a symbol. A symbol that would draw enemies to destroy them more, give them the strength to unite a divided kingdom. Adrian and Liana returned to the capital after many days of hardship. Their clothes were worn, and their faces showed the strain of the journey. The guards with them were tired, yet grateful that the two had survived the ambush when so many others had not. The news of the attack traveled faster than they could. By the time they reached the palace gates, whispers had already spread through every corridor and courtyard. Some spoke with pity, others with suspicion. Many nobles believed the event proved that placing trust in Adrian was reckless. When Adrian entered the great hall with Liana by his side, the queen stood waiting. She looked at them closely, and for a moment her strict face softened with relief that her daughter still lived. But almost at once her strength returned, and she lifted her chin. She required answers. A gathering of nobles and counselors filled the chamber, each eager to give their own opinion. Some demanded that the revolt be crushed with fire and sword. Others argued for forgiveness to prevent further anger. Yet beneath their words, Adrian heard something deeper: fear of change, and fear of losing their place in the queen's court. That same evening, Adrian could not rest. The faces of the rebels haunted him, their shouts echoing in his head. He thought over the attack carefully. These miners had been angry, but their ambush was too well organized. The timing was not random. Someone had whispered guidance to them, someone with power and influence. He walked through the palace gardens, trying to clear his thoughts, when he saw a faint glimmer under a door near the old library. Curiosity led him there. Inside, the room was empty, but on the desk lay a set of scrolls and messages. Adrian read quickly by the flickering light. What he found chilled him. Letters signed by Lord Garion, one of the Queen's most trusted counselors, revealed plans for stirring unrest. He had promised the rebels aid in exchange for their rebellion against the queen. His purpose was clear: weaken the throne, discredit the queen's choice for her daughter, and finally overthrow the rule of Illyria herself. Adrian held the papers tightly, his hands shaking. He knew if he presented them alone, many would laugh at him and call him a liar. Garion was respected, his voice loud in the court, and the word of one man from Earth would mean little against him. He remembered how often the nobles had scoffed at his presence, calling him unworthy even behind polite smiles. The evidence could be his undoing if others refused to believe it. The next day, during council, Adrian stepped before the queen and her advisors. His voice carried steady, though his body tensed. He told them about the ambush, about the manner it was carried out, and finally he placed the scrolls on the table. He pointed to the words, the seals, the handwriting. Many nobles shifted uneasily, but others burst into scoffs and mockery. Garion himself stood calm and collected. He denied it all, his words smooth as silk, his tone heavy with scorn. Yet before the doubt could spread too far, Princess Lyanna rose from her seat. This time her voice rang louder than any in the chamber. She told the court what she had seen with her own eyes on the journey, how Adrian defended her against death when nobles would have run. She said, "This man is more loyal to this kingdom than those who wear fine robes yet conspire against it. If my mother's command brought him here, then it was not only wise but necessary. I will stand beside him in truth and in loyalty." Her words struck the hall like a blade. Many who had doubted Adrian stared in silence. To hear such strength from the princess herself gave new weight to the accusations. The queen studied Garion carefully, and in her gaze was the warning of a storm. She ordered guards to seize him and to search his estate for any further evidence of treason. Garion protested, but his voice at last trembled under the commanding silence of the queen. For Adrian, the moment felt both terrifying and relieving. Lyanna's choice to defend him had saved his word from being dismissed. More than that, her trust lit something powerful inside him. He realized she no longer looked at him as a stranger forced upon her future. No, she now saw him as a partner who had proven his worth not through birth but through action. That night, as the palace torches burned against the dark, Adrian and Lyanna spoke quietly on the balcony overlooking the city. The stars shone above them, and in that stillness she said, "Perhaps our fate is not a chain, but a bridge. Perhaps this command was never a burden, but a chance." For the first time, Adrian smiled without fear, for though storms still brewed beyond the walls of the palace, he knew he was no longer walking alone. The weeks that followed the arrest of Lord Garion were uneasy for the kingdom. His betrayal shook the court, and many nobles who had once been loud with their pride now kept silent. The queen moved carefully, replacing traitors with loyal servants, and sending word across the provinces that justice would be fair. The people began to calm, though scars remained from the revolt. In the capital, rumors still drifted, yet one truth had settled firmly in every whisper. Adrian Cole was no longer an unwanted stranger. He was the man who had helped reveal treachery, defended the princess against certain death, and stood against plots that could have shattered the throne. Still, Adrian did not let this pride rise too high. He remembered too well how quickly fortunes changed, how carefully one had to walk among those who smiled with false words. Yet every time he looked at Lyanna, he felt stronger. She now walked beside him with confidence, not hesitation. Their conversations no longer cut with sharp edges, but carried a rhythm of trust. At first, their bond had been forged from duty, but through fire and trials it had grown into something deeper. When the queen finally made her announcement, it was not whispered behind closed doors. She stood before the people of the capital, before merchants, soldiers, farmers, and nobles alike. Her voice carried down the streets as she declared that her daughter would be wed to Adrian Cole, son of Earth, chosen not only by decree, but now by trust, courage, and proof of loyalty. There were cheers from the common people who had grown to admire the man who fought for their princess. Nobles bowed, though some did so with clenched teeth, yet none could deny the will of their queen or the spirit of the moment. The day of the wedding came when spring flowers burst across the palace gardens. From the city walls to the smallest street corner, banners of white and golden cloth hung in honor. Bells rang from dawn, their chimes rolling across the hills and rivers. Thousands gathered in the capital square, filling every balcony and rooftop to catch even the smallest glimpse. Adrian prepared with nervous hands in the chamber given to him. His clothes were no longer the plain suit he had first worn upon his arrival, but a robe of deep blue lined with silver, chosen to show respect to Valoria's traditions. He studied himself in the mirror, half believing he still looked like an ordinary man caught in extraordinary events. Yet when the guards came to escort him, he straightened his posture, breathing slow, and told himself he would not stumble. The cathedral glowed as sunlight poured through its arched windows, bathing the aisle in color. At the far end, the queen stood tall, while musicians filled the air with soft notes. Then the doors opened. Princess Liana entered, dressed in white silk that shimmered like water. Her crown sparkled, but it was her expression that caught Adrian most. She no longer looked at him as a stranger she was forced to endure. Her eyes met his and held steady, a look filled with strength and quiet warmth. As they reached one another, the voices of the people outside the cathedral could be heard even through the heavy doors. They shouted blessings, cried tears, and sang songs of hope. The queen's words bound their union, yet it was their choice in that moment, their shared glance, that made the vow real. They clasped hands not only for duty but for faith in each other. When the ceremony was complete, the people roared with joy. The new couple stepped onto the balcony, and the square below erupted. Flowers were thrown into the air, banners waved, and the sound of thousands cheering made the walls tremble. Adrian raised Liana's hand high, and for the first time since his arrival, he felt not like an outsider, but like a part of this world. Later that evening, when the crowd had thinned and the music faded, Adrian and Liana stood together on the same balcony where they had spoken so quietly once before. The city lay calm below, torches glowing like stars. Anna leaned slightly against him and said, in a gentle tone that surprised him from the beginning, "I thought this was a chain. Now I see it as a choice, and I do not regret it." Adrian smiled, feeling the truth of her words in his whole being. Neither do the first. Whatever storms may come, we will face them together. And so, under the endless stars of the kingdom, the story that had begun with a strange and unwanted command became a story of trust, sacrifice, and love. It was not the end, but the beginning of a new age, one where a man from Earth and a princess of Valoria would lead side by side, bound not by fear, but by the strength of their hearts.